So I want you to imagine an NBA Finals game. Game 7, fourth quarter, just like 2 minutes left on the clock.
Oh man, the absolute highest stakes moment in the sport.
Exactly. The pressure is unbelievable. But then you look over at the bench, and sitting there, completely unbothered, is the greatest offensive player of our generation.
Like a prime LeBron James or Steph Curry.
Yeah, exactly. LeBron, Steph, whoever. And here's the crazy part. They aren't injured.
No.
They aren't in foul trouble either. They are sitting on the bench because, under these radical new rules of basketball we're looking at today, they are legally not allowed to step on the court to play defense.
Which is just such a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Yeah.
So today, for this deep dive, we are putting a highly controversial document under the microscope. It's an excerpt of notes, simply titled The Business Test.docs.
Specifically, we're looking at a section labeled Day 4, the business test.
Right. And it basically outlines this totally fantasy sports concept where the traditional game of basketball is just torn down to its absolute foundation.
And then rebuilt with entirely separated offense and defense platoons.
Yes. Heavy, heavy strategy. Constant, frequent substitutions.
Well, you have a purely offensive unit and then a purely defensive unit.
Swapping out like line changes in hockey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the premise of this document isn't just about whether this would be like a fun video game to play or a fun pickup game.
Right, goes way deeper than that.
It does. The author kicks off this section with a thesis that really frames our entire discussion today. They write, this is where most fantasy sports ideas die.
Which is such a great hook.
It is, because they are outlining a gauntlet. The idea might be tactically fascinating, right? Mathematically balanced.
Theoretically perfect on a whiteboard somewhere.
Exactly. But the document proposes running this concept through the ultimate unforgiving machinery of reality.
The business test.
The business impact. Specifically on the fans, the television networks, and the players' union.
So, if you're listening to this right now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of, say, a sports league investor. Or maybe someone looking to launch a massive, disruptive new sports product.
You're sitting in the boardroom looking at this rule change.
And you have to really sweat the details. You can't just think about the purity of the sport or how cool the strategy is.
No, you have to constantly weigh the financial risks of these mechanics against, the love of the game.
Right. Like, are you making a mathematically better sport, or are you just straight up bankrupting your league?
Because the very first barrier to entry for any sport, before a single dollar of TV revenue is even negotiated, is eyeballs.
You need people to actually sit on their couch and watch the thing.
Right, which is exactly where the document starts.
Yeah.
It identifies this immediate tension between this new, highly strategic format and the pacing that traditional basketball fans expect.
Yeah, let's talk about that pacing. Because when we talk about basketball in its current form, we are fundamentally talking about continuous kinetic flow.
It's constant motion.
10 athletes moving fluidly from one end of the floor to the other, transitioning from offense to defense in like a fraction of a second.
Right. The appeal is in the cardiovascular endurance, the improvisational jazz of the fast break.
Yes, the seamless transition of roles. You shoot, you miss, you sprint back to defend.
But this proposed format changes that rhythm entirely.
Completely.
Because more strategy and more specialized substitutions inherently means more stoppages.
The whistle blows. The offensive 5 walk-off.
The defensive 5 walk-on.
The coaches huddle with their respective units.
Right. And the defense sets up a highly complex, pre-planned zone scheme. And then the offensive point guard walks the ball up the floor, surveys the scheme.
And calls a literal audible.
Exactly. It becomes incredibly methodical.
It fundamentally shifts the psychological contract with the viewer, I think.
Oh, absolutely. The document explicitly asks, would fans enjoy more strategy, more substitutions, slower pace?
And that forces us to analyze the demographics of sports viewership.
Because there's a very distinct tension here between the hardcore tactical fan and the casual consumer.
Right. The hardcore fan wants the chess match.
They want to see the intricacies of a perfectly executed weak-side defensive rotation.
They want to see the offensive countermove to a trap. To them, a stoppage isn't dead time.
No, it's the anticipation of the next strategic deployment.
Wait, but let me play devil's advocate here. Wouldn't a highly strategic game create a more rabid, dedicated fan base?
How do you mean?
Well, we see this in other markets, right? Look at esports, or even the recent massive boom in online chess.
That's true.
Those are incredibly methodical, deeply strategic, relatively slow-paced pursuits. and their engagement metrics are astronomical.
Right, millions of viewers.
Yeah. So could this new basketball concept just be targeting a different, highly lucrative demographic? Maybe they're just shedding the casual viewer to build a more engaged, higher monetizing hardcore audience.
I mean, that is a really tempting parallel to draw, but it misses a critical structural difference in how traditional physical sports are monetized versus niche digital sports.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the sheer scale of infrastructure required to run a physical, premier professional sports league. Think about the arenas, the travel logistics,
The insurance.
the insurance, the baseline player salaries. It requires mass market adoption to survive.
I see.
Niche audiences can sustain digital products because the overhead is comparatively minimal. I mean, running a chess server is cheap.
Right, you don't need a billion-dollar stadium to host a chess match on Twitch.
Exactly. But physical sports leagues require billions in revenue, and the casual fan is the engine of that revenue.
Because the casual fan is the one tuning in after a long day at work.
Right. They aren't looking to solve a complex puzzle. They want pure, unfiltered adrenaline.
They want to see a steal, a fast break, and a gravity-defying dunk.
If you give them a slower, more methodical game that requires deep analytical engagement just to understand what's happening,
They might just reach for the remote.
they absolutely will.
I see what you're saying. The scale necessitates the lowest common denominator of entertainment, which is visceral action.
Exactly. And this document directly addresses that. Right after listing those slower-paced traits, it asks, or would it feel too much like football?
That's such a sharp observation by the author.
It is incredibly sharp because they recognize that this fantasy concept is effectively trying to graft the structural DNA of American football onto the body of basketball.
It's an attempt to borrow a proven success model, because football is the ultimate stop-and-go sport.
And it is wildly, unprecedentedly successful in the United States.
Right. It relies heavily on specialized units. You have an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator.
Specialized personnel for every specific down and distance.
The play lasts for roughly 6 seconds of extreme explosive violence.
And then everyone stands around for 40 seconds while the complex strategy is relayed from the booth to the helmet.
Right, so the temptation for a fantasy sports designer makes total sense. They look at the NFL's multi-billion-dollar broadcasting deals and say, hey, if we make basketball function more like football, we will capture that same massive audience and that same revenue.
But that assumes the audiences are interchangeable,
Which they might not be.
or that the psychological appeal of a sport seamlessly translates across completely different physical mediums.
Yeah, that's a huge leap.
Football has evolved over a century to perfectly optimize that turn-based stop-and-go tension. The viewer has been conditioned over generations to enjoy the explosive burst followed by the suspense of the huddle.
While basketball, conversely, has evolved over its century to optimize continuous flow.
Right, you are asking a fan base that has been conditioned to watch a marathon to suddenly derive the exact same pleasure from a series of highly choreographed, isolated sprints.
Think about movie genres to really understand the gap here.
Oh, I like this.
Basketball, as it is traditionally played, is an action thriller. Think of something like the movie Mad Max, Fury Road.
Yeah.
The foot hits the gas in the opening scene, and it literally does not stop. The appeal is the relentless momentum. You don't have time to breathe. You are swept up in the continuous motion, and that is exactly why you buy the ticket.
And this proposed fantasy basketball concept.
It's like taking that action thriller and stopping the war rig every 5 minutes to have a deeply intellectual, methodical conversation about fuel efficiency.
That's hilarious.
Or like desert navigation tactics and the logistics of water distribution.
You are essentially turning an action movie into a dialogue-heavy legal drama.
Exactly. Now, a legal drama can be an absolute masterpiece.
Sure.
It requires deep thinking, strategy, parsing through complex arguments. But if you market a high-octane action thriller to an audience and then lock them in a theater and show them a methodical legal drama,
They are going to walk out.
they're going to praise the intellectual rigor of the script. They are going to demand to know where the car chases are.
That framing highlights the core business risk perfectly. You risk alienating your massive existing core demographic while attempting to borrow the structural success of a completely different product that you haven't historically been designed to emulate.
Right.
As an investor looking at this, you have to grapple with the reality of consumer behavior.
If the game is constantly stopping for specialized platoon substitutions, are you stripping out the core product value, the flow, the athleticism, just to satisfy a theoretical tactical fantasy?
Well, hold on, let's flip the perspective.
Okay.
If the casual fan tunes out because of the slower pace, the immediate victims are the TV networks, right? The ratings drop.
Yeah, that would be the assumption.
But ironically, as we look at the next part of this document, this slower pace might actually be exactly what the network executives think they want.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The document clearly lays out the perceived positives for the networks. It says more commercial breaks and more strategy analysis.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is where the tension between the on-court product and the off-court business model becomes incredibly pronounced.
Exactly. In the broadcasting world, everything revolves around inventory.
Right, inventory being the amount of time during a live broadcast that a network can sell to advertisers.
Right. In a traditional free-flowing game of basketball, the network is desperate for organic stoppages. They rely on coaches calling timeouts or fouls being committed.
Or the ball just going out of bounds.
Exactly, just to meet their contractual obligations to show ads.
In fact, leagues have had to artificially inject mandatory commercial timeouts into the rules.
Like the under 7-minute mark in the NBA.
Yeah, just to guarantee that TV networks get their inventory.
Because without those stoppages, the network paid billions for broadcasting rights, but has no way to actually air the commercials that recoup that money.
But in this fantasy documents version of the game, with constant offensive and defensive platoon substitutions,
The stoppages aren't artificial interruptions anymore.
they are baked into the very DNA of the game.
Exactly. The correlation between complex strategy and commercial inventory is absolute.
If your game relies on heavy strategy, that strategy requires communication and personnel changes.
It requires players coming off the floor, coaches drawing up intricate plays on clipboards.
And entirely new, specialized units taking the court and getting into formation.
Every single one of those moments is a natural, justified break in the action.
It's a money printing machine.
It really is.
Instead of waiting for a coach to get angry and call a timeout, the game mechanics demand pauses. You have essentially created a turn-based sport out of a continuous one, much like baseball or football.
And every time the turn switches, the network can seamlessly cut to a 30-second spot for an insurance company or a new pickup truck.
For a TV executive looking at a spreadsheet, the potential revenue ceiling just skyrocketed.
Furthermore, the document specifically points out more strategy analysis as a massive positive for the TV networks.
Right, because what happens when you don't go to commercial during one of those breaks?
Exactly. Think about the extended breaks where they don't cut away, perhaps during a shorter substitution or a strategic review. The network has to fill that dead air time.
And in a highly strategic platoon-based game, they have the perfect environment to create an entirely new, highly monetizable sub-product.
The in-game analytical breakdown?
The rise of the telestrator.
Yes. You bring in a panel of former head coaches, you give them a massive touchscreen.
And they start drawing circles and arrows on the screen, breaking down the exact weak side zone defense the defensive platoon just deployed.
And how the offensive point guard is attempting to exploit it.
You aren't just selling the athletic performance anymore. You are selling the intellectual property of the strategy.
You are building an entire industry of analysts, much like you see on Sundays in the NFL.
So for a TV executive, this looks like a slam dunk on paper. You have organically increased your ad inventory, maximizing short-term revenue.
And you have deepened the engagement for that hardcore, highly profitable demographic we discussed earlier through high-level strategy analysis.
However, and this is a big however, the author of this document is incredibly astute.
They are, because they don't let this apparent financial win stand unchallenged.
No, they immediately pivot to the profound negatives for the TV networks. They list less flow and fewer highlight sequences.
Okay, let's stop and really look at that second point. Fewer highlight sequences.
Because while a network executive in their 50s might love the idea of more commercial inventory, the marketing department knows that highlights are the modern currency of global sports.
They're the absolute lifeblood of modern audience acquisition.
We are operating in a fractured attention economy.
A sports league does not grow its brand, reach younger demographics, or expand its footprint internationally by expecting teenagers in Europe or Asia to sit down and watch a full 3-hour broadcast.
especially a methodical broadcast filled with commercial breaks.
Exactly. The growth engine is viral, bite-sized clips,
It is a 10-second video of an impossible crossover dribble on TikTok,
or a soaring, posterizing dunk on Instagram.
or a chaotic chase down block in transition. That single 10-second clip, algorithmically distributed across social media platforms, generates tens of millions of impressions instantly.
It is free, high-impact marketing on a scale that traditional advertising cannot replicate.
And in traditional basketball, those viral highlights almost exclusively happen because of the continuous flow.
They happen in transition,
Right. A defensive player gambles for a steal, grabs the ball, pushes the pace at full sprint,
catches the opposing defense completely scrambling backward.
and does something spectacularly athletic before the defense can even get set.
It is the chaos that breeds the magic.
But if we look at our document's fantasy scenario, if the rules dictate that the game stops every time possession changes,
Just to allow the specialized defensive platoon to trot onto the floor and set up their perfect strategic formation.
you completely eliminate the fast break.
You eliminate the scrambling defense.
You eliminate the mismatched personnel.
You eliminate the very environment that historically breeds virality.
And this creates a massive existential business tension for the TV networks and the league ownership.
Because you are optimizing your product for immediate, short-term monetization.
You are squeezing in more commercial breaks, maximizing today's CPMs and ad revenue.
But in doing so, you are actively sacrificing the long-term cultural relevance and brand growth that comes from explosive, viral highlight sequences.
So it's a classic trap. As an investor, you might be looking at a spreadsheet showing a 20% increase in ad revenue for the next 3 years.
And high-fiving everyone in the boardroom.
Right, but you are trading away the 14-year-old kid in another country who isn't going to buy a jersey or a streaming subscription 5 years from now because they never saw a mind-blowing highlight reel on their phone.
Are networks truly willing to make that trade?
Are they short-sighted enough to sacrifice the viral wow factor of a fast break dunk just to squeeze in one more commercial for a fast food chain?
Well, history suggests that corporate entities often prioritize short-term quarterly earnings over long-term cultural dominance, which makes this a very real risk.
It's terrifying, honestly.
The fantasy idea easily passes the immediate TV revenue test by creating more inventory. But it fundamentally fails the cultural longevity test.
Because a sport that cannot generate organic buzz outside of its broadcast window is a sport that is slowly dying.
Which brings us to a massive blind spot that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, right. We've talked about the fans in the stands and the executives in the broadcast truck. But what about the product itself?
The player.
What about the labor force? Because if you change the rules of the game this drastically, you fundamentally alter the value of the human beings playing it.
This brings us to what I think is the most explosive part of this entire document, the players' union and the economic earthquake.
This section represents an absolute masterclass in unintended consequences. The document prompts us with a terrifying scenario for any front office. It says, imagine negotiating offensive contracts, defensive contracts.
It is explicitly asking us to examine what happens when you completely bifurcate the labor pool.
To understand why this is an earthquake, we have to look at how modern front offices calculate player value right now.
Right. In traditional basketball, players are evaluated on an aggregate of their skills.
You have advanced metrics like VORP value over replacement player or PER, player efficiency rating.
Those algorithms try to synthesize a player's shooting, rebounding, passing, and defense into a single number representing their total contribution to winning.
But historically, let's be entirely honest, offense pays the bills.
Oh, 100%. The guy who drops 30 points a night, who can create his own shot in isolation, he is the face of the franchise.
He gets the shoe deal, he gets the billboards, and crucially, he gets the max contract.
While a defensive specialist, the player whose sole job is to lock down the opposing team's superstar, is considered a highly valuable role player.
They are essential to a championship run, sure, but they are rarely the highest paid player on the roster.
They might earn $15 million a year, while the elite scorer earns $50 million.
The economic hierarchy of traditional basketball heavily subsidizes the offensive engine.
But under the rules of this fantasy concept, you have entirely separate offensive and defensive platoons.
Meaning the value proposition of an individual skill set fundamentally and permanently changes.
If a player is only on the court for the defensive half of the game, Their defensive ability is no longer just one piece of a pie chart.
It is their entire job description.
They are the anchor of exactly 50% of the game.
And the document drops an absolute hammer of a realization right here. It states simply, a defensive star might earn the same as a scorer.
Think about the mathematical and structural reality of a sports labor union. Let's look at the NBPA or any major players association.
Okay.
Their mandate is to secure the maximum possible share of revenue for their members based on quantifiable contribution.
If the structure of the game mandates a two-platoon system, a premier defensive stopper is now objectively, mathematically, equally as critical to winning the game as a premier scorer.
Let's use an analogy to really lock down how insane this would be for a team's budget.
I love analogies. Hit me.
It's like a hospital administration suddenly deciding that the lead anesthesiologist and the lead cardiovascular surgeon must be paid the exact same massive salary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Historically, the surgeon gets the prestige, the glory, and the massive paycheck.
Right.
The anesthesiologist makes a great living, but it's a fraction of the surgeon's rate.
But under a new union mandate, the anesthesiologist argues, the patient absolutely dies without me. My time in the operating room is identical to the surgeon's time.
My function is 50% of the procedure's success. Therefore, my compensation must be identical.
And if the hospital administration is forced to agree to that logic, their entire operating budget instantly collapses.
It shatters the financial models.
Because in major professional sports leagues, you operate under a salary cap.
Right, a strict mathematical limit on the total amount of money a franchise can spend on its roster, designed to maintain competitive balance across the league.
Front offices spend millions on analytics departments purely to figure out how to efficiently distribute that capped money.
You allocate your massive, league-leading max contracts to your elite offensive engines.
And you fill out the rest of the roster with mid-level exceptions, rookie contracts, and veteran minimums.
But if the defensive captain sits down at the bargaining table and says, look at the data, my defensive platoon played exactly as many minutes as your offensive platoon.
My unit prevented exactly as many points as your offensive unit scored. You are paying the offensive captain $50 million. I require $50 million.
What does the general manager do?
The general manager realizes that the math no longer works.
If a team has to pay a premier defender the exact same premium max contract as an elite scorer, you have suddenly doubled the financial burden on the ownership for top-tier talent.
Under a hard salary cap, if you have two max contracts taking up 70% of your budget, you have literally no money left to pay the other 10 players on your rosters.
The middle class of the sports league vanishes entirely. You would have 2 billionaires and a bunch of guys making minimum wage.
Well, wait. Why wouldn't the owners just raise the salary cap?
What do you mean?
Like, if the game requires two distinct sets of superstars, just increase the limit on what teams are allowed to spend.
Because the salary cap isn't just an arbitrary number pulled out of thin air. In modern collective bargaining agreements, the salary cap is directly tied to a percentage of basketball-related income, or BRI.
Ah.
The cap is a reflection of the total revenue the league generates, from ticket sales, merchandise, and crucially, those massive television deals we just talked about.
So you cannot artificially raise the salary cap without actually generating more physical revenue to back it up.
Exactly.
Oh, man. I see the trap now. It's a massive self-defeating loop.
Precisely. You implement this highly strategic stop-and-go fantasy rule change. Because it's slower, you lose the casual fans who want fast-paced action.
Because you lose the casual fans, your overall ratings might dip, or at the very least, your cultural relevance drops because you aren't generating viral highlights.
But simultaneously, your labor force, the players' union, is demanding that you double your max contract expenditures to fairly compensate the specialized defensive platoon.
You are demanding exponentially more money from the owners at the exact moment your product might be losing mass market appeal.
It's an economic earthquake.
The author of the business test.docs clearly sees this collision coming from miles away.
They see the collision between the pure theoretical brilliance of a tactical game and the incredibly muddy, unforgiving reality of a multi-billion-dollar business operation.
You can design the perfect game, but if the labor economics don't work, the league folds in 3 years.
Which naturally leads us to the culmination of the document.
Right. We have examined the fan pacing and the psychological contract.
The television monetization and inventory tension.
And the labor economics of a bifurcated workforce.
Now, The author pulls us back from the spreadsheets and the bargaining tables to look at the philosophical core that ties all of these business risks together.
Yes, the final section of the document, the ultimate debate.
The author distills all of this complex business theory down to a single, incredibly potent question.
The document leaves us with this to end on. Would fans rather watch better basketball or more entertaining basketball?
And then they add a final definitive thought. That's the whole debate.
It is a profound distinction, and it requires us to carefully contrast those two concepts based entirely on the mechanical changes we've analyzed today.
So what exactly does better basketball imply in the context of this fantasy documents two-platoon system?
Better implies flawlessness.
Right.
It implies the absolute zenith of strategic execution. If you have specialized platoons, you have players who are perfectly rested because they only play half the game.
You have flawless defensive execution because the defensive coach can perfectly align his specialized personnel against the offensive platoon.
Without worrying about whether those defenders also have the energy to run a fast break on the other end.
It means no accidental mismatches in transition.
It is an academic exercise in tactical superiority. It is a chess grandmaster playing a computer simulation where no pieces are ever accidentally dropped or misplaced.
It is mechanically, mathematically, and strategically superior. It eliminates the variables of fatigue and multifaceted skill requirements.
Now, contrast that theoretical perfection with entertaining basketball.
Entertainment, by its very nature in the realm of sports, relies heavily on flow, pace, and momentum shifts.
But more importantly, entertainment relies heavily on imperfection.
Yes, the human element.
The vulnerability of the athlete.
Exactly. The peak moments of entertainment in sports rarely come from a strategy being executed exactly as it was drawn up on a whiteboard.
No, entertainment often comes from the breakdown of strategy.
It comes from the chaos of a broken play. Think of a quarterback in football scrambling out of a collapsing pocket and throwing a wild pass across his body.
Or think of a basketball player losing his dribble, recovering the ball on his knees, and tossing up a prayer as the shot clock expires.
It comes from a player being absolutely exhausted in the fourth quarter, having played 40 minutes of both grueling offense and defense, and having to dig into reserves of sheer human willpower to make a final stop.
The fantasy idea actively removes that chaos to create a better, more controlled game.
But in doing so, it clinically eliminates the very thing that makes the game entertaining to the human beings watching it.
The human struggle is what we relate to. We don't relate to flawless algorithms. We relate to a tired guy pushing past his limits.
And this is the true heart of the business test.
We started this deep dive with the author's quote, "This is where most fantasy sports ideas die."
Why do they die? Because they are designed in a vacuum by people who love the underlying mechanics of the sport, but who fundamentally forget that professional sports are, first and foremost, a massive pillar of the entertainment industry.
You can design a game that is an absolute masterpiece of strategic depth and logical consistency, but if it isn't entertaining, people won't watch it.
And if people don't watch it, the television networks won't buy the commercial inventory.
The basketball-related income plummets.
And the owners can't meet the salary cap demands of the players' union.
The entire ecosystem collapses because it failed the very first test of capturing human imagination.
It's an incredible realization. A mathematically perfect game that fails the entertainment test is simply a failed business.
You aren't selling the X's and O's on a whiteboard. You are selling the feeling a fan gets in their chest when the clock is ticking down, the defense is frantically scrambling because they are out of position, the offense is improvising on the fly, and a shot goes up at the buzzer.
That tension, that collective gasp from 20,000 people in an arena, doesn't come from perfect strategy. It comes from human struggle and the ever-present threat of failure.
When we look back at the entire document, we can see the brilliance of the author's critical thinking.
They didn't just invent a cool, radical rule change and marvel at their own ingenuity.
They took their idea and stress-tested it against the pillars of reality. They forced us to look at the second, third, and fourth-order effects of a single mechanical shift.
So if we synthesize this journey for you, our listener, our hypothetical league investor who has been evaluating this pitch from the beginning.
We started with the fantasy sports concept involving heavy strategy, separated offense and defense platoons, and constant methodical substitutions.
We evaluated how its slower, stop-and-go pace risked severely alienating the casual fans who crave continuous action and flow.
Even while that exact same pace tempted television network executives with the promise of more lucrative commercial breaks and new avenues for analytical programming.
We then uncovered the massive, hidden trap in the labor market.
How this bifurcated structure would completely upend the players' union negotiations and the sport's baseline economics.
Demanding that specialized defensive players be paid the exact same premium max contracts as high-scoring superstars, which would mathematically break the traditional salary cap model.
And finally, we arrived at the philosophical core of the entire test.
The stark realization that creating a technically better, more strategically pure game often comes at the direct expense of creating an entertaining one.
And in the multi-billion-dollar business of professional sports, entertainment is the ultimate, non-negotiable metric of survival.
It is a phenomenal thought experiment.
It really is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought.
Okay, lay it on us.
Something that builds on everything we've read in this document, but takes it out of the corporate boardrooms, past the TV broadcast trucks, and down into the real world. Think about the grassroots level.
The developmental pipelines.
Exactly. If this fantasy system actually were adopted, if a league commissioner pushed it through, the networks bought the rights, and suddenly specialized defensive stoppers were being handed the exact same $50 million maximum contracts as the high-scoring superstars.
Yeah.
How would that dramatically change the culture of the sport for the next generation?
Oh, wow.
Think about the kids playing in AAU tournaments or just shooting around in their driveways in local parks. Right now, what are they doing?
They are out there practicing game-winning step-back three-pointers.
They are practicing their ball handling because that is what gets you famous.
That is what gets you the college scholarship, the massive shoe deal, and the max contract.
The financial incentives dictate the developmental focus.
Exactly.
But if the rules change and pure defense pays exactly as well as pure offense, would those kids stop practicing their jump shots?
Would a 12-year-old kid start spending hours in the driveway by themselves, not shooting the ball, but just practicing defensive slides, closeouts, and weak-side rotational positioning?
It would completely bifurcate the future talent tool of the game from childhood.
You wouldn't just be changing how the game is played on television tonight. You would be fundamentally rewiring the aspirations and skill development of millions of young athletes for the next 20 years.
The entire evolutionary track of basketball talent would split in two distinct directions.
You would be engineering a future where half the players arriving in the professional leagues physically cannot shoot a basketball.
And the other half are completely incapable of defending, purely because they were financially incentivized from childhood to only care about one side of the ball.
It is absolutely mind-blowing how a simple tweak to the substitution rules in a Word document echoes all the way down to a kid practicing alone in a driveway.
It proves the central thesis of the document perfectly. The business mechanics of a sport inevitably dictate the physical reality of the sport itself.
It really does.
So the next time you hear a brilliant, mathematically perfect pitch for a new idea, whether it's in sports, tech, or any industry, remember to take it out of the pristine laboratory.
Look past the flawless blueprints.
You have to ask yourself, is this going to hold up when it collides with human emotion, consumer behavior, and cold, hard labor economics?
Because as the business test reminded us today, the structural perfection of an idea doesn't matter if it shatters the moment you apply the pressure of reality.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the big questions, keep looking for the hidden mechanics behind the curtain, and we will see you next time.